Hello, and welcome to Lyla's Lullabies, where we spend time exploring with Lyla, a traveler who wanders the world at her own pace, while sharing her most enriching and restorative moments with you. In tonight's story, we'll follow Lyla as she explores the wonders found in Yosemite National Park. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to remember. Just settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself go. We're so glad you're here. Whenever you're ready, let's begin. The morning air at Yosemite Village carried a coolness that hinted at the altitude, though the sun was already warming the valley floor. Lyla had risen early, enjoyed a simple breakfast at her lodge, and now stood near the tour meeting point, watching the first light touch the granite cliffs that rose impossibly high on either side of the valley. A large, open-sided Jeep was parked nearby, its olive green paint dusty from previous excursions. A woman with sun-bleached blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail was checking something under the hood. She wore hiking boots, cargo pants, and a park ranger-style shirt, though Lyla could see she wasn't actually a ranger. The shirt had a tour company logo on the sleeve. As Lyla approached, the woman looked up and smiled. "Good morning! You here for the Yosemite backcountry tour?" "I am. I'm Lyla." "Perfect. I'm Beth. I'll be your guide today. We've got a great group coming together. Just a few more folks to arrive and we'll head out. Help yourself to water bottles in that cooler there." Lyla took a bottle and glanced around. Two people were already waiting. A man who looked to be in his 70s, with an impressive white beard, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a vest covered in pockets, and a younger woman with dark curly hair escaping from under a baseball cap, studying a trail map. The older man extended his hand. "Douglas," he said in a measured voice, "from Vermont. I'm a retired geologist, and I've been wanting to visit Yosemite for about 40 years. Finally made it happen." "That's wonderful," Lyla said, shaking his hand. The younger woman looked up from her map and smiled. "I'm Zara from Chicago. I'm a landscape photographer. Well, trying to be. This is like Mecca for nature photographers, so I'm pretty excited." A couple walked up together, both wearing matching turquoise hiking shoes that looked fresh out of the box. "Hi there," the woman said cheerfully. "We're May and Owen from Seattle. We just got engaged last week, and we thought, what better way to celebrate than a trip to Yosemite?" "Congratulations," Lyla said. "Thanks. We're not really big hikers yet. These shoes are our first pair, but we figured we had to start somewhere." The last member of their group arrived slightly out of breath, carrying a expensive-looking camera and wearing a sun hat that could have shaded 3 people. Sorry. I got distracted photographing a squirrel. I'm Anish, from Toronto. Wildlife biologist by training, though these days I mostly teach middle school science and try to convince 12-year-olds that nature is cooler than their phones." Beth laughed. "Well, you're in the right place for that. Okay, everyone's here. Let me tell you about our plan for today. We're going to take this Jeep. She's a beast, but she's reliable, and head to some of the less crowded spots in the park. We'll stop at overlooks, do some short hikes, and I'll show you parts of Yosemite most tourists never see. Sound good?" The group murmured their agreement and began climbing into the Jeep. It had 3 rows of seats, all facing forward with plenty of room. Lyla chose a spot on the left side where she'd have a good view, and Douglas settled in beside her. Zara and Anish took the back row, already comparing camera equipment, while May and Owen sat in the middle, holding hands. Beth climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, which rumbled to life with a satisfying growl. First stop is Tunnel View, which I know is touristy, but there's a reason it's famous. You need to see it, especially in May when the waterfalls are at their peak. They drove out of the village, and within minutes the landscape began to open up. The road wound through tall pines and cedars, their trunks massive and their branches filtering the sunlight into shifting patterns. Through gaps in the trees, Lyla could catch glimpses of the granite walls rising on either side. As they drove, Beth pointed out features. That's the Merced River down there. It runs the length of the valley. In May, it's still running high from snowmelt. And those dark streaks you see on the cliff faces? That's desert varnish, a kind of mineral coating that builds up over thousands of years. Douglas, you probably know more about that than I do. Douglas leaned forward with interest. Manganese and iron oxides, mostly, takes an incredibly long time to form. Those streaks could be 10, 20,000 years old. Finally, something older than me, Anish quipped from the back, and everyone chuckled. The Jeep climbed a winding road, and suddenly Beth pulled into a viewpoint. Here we are, Tunnel View, everybody out. They climbed from the Jeep and walked to the stone wall at the edge of the overlook, and Lyla felt her breath catch. The entire Yosemite Valley spread before them like a painting. El Capitan's massive vertical face on the left, half dome in the distance at the valley's end, and on the right, Bridalveil Fall cascading down in a ribbon of white water. The valley floor was green with meadows and forests, and the morning light made everything crisp and clear. Oh, wow, May breathed. This is the classic view, Beth said. Ansel Adams photographed it, probably 1,000 other photographers have too, but it never gets old. Every time I bring a group here, it hits the same way. Zara was already setting up her camera, adjusting settings and muttering to herself about light levels. Anish was using binoculars to scan the cliff faces. Looking for climbers, he explained. People actually climb El Capitan. Takes days. They sleep hanging in hammocks on the rock face. Wow, I don't think so, Owen said. I don't even like the top bunk, May laughed, squeezing his hand. They stood at the overlook for a while, each person taking it in at their own pace. Douglas pointed out different rock formations, explaining how glaciers had carved the valley during the Ice Age. All this granite was once deep underground, he said, miles below the surface. It cooled slowly, which is why the crystals in it are so large. Then erosion removed all the rock above it, exposing it, and then the glaciers came and carved these shapes. So we're looking at the roots of ancient mountains? Lyla asked. Exactly that, the roots of mountains that don't exist anymore. It was a humbling thought. Lyla looked at the massive cliffs with new appreciation, thinking about the millions of years of geological time they represented. Eventually, Beth gathered them back to the Jeep. Next stop is a little off the beaten path, a meadow I know where we might see some wildlife. They drove deeper into the park, leaving the main valley behind. The road became narrower, less maintained, and the Jeep handled it easily, bumping over ruts and rocks. The forest here was denser, the trees older. Sunlight filtered through in golden shafts, and the air smelled of pine sap and earth. Beth turned onto what was barely a road, more like 2 tire tracks through the grass, and drove slowly until the trees opened up to reveal a large meadow. She cut the engine. Okay, we're gonna be quiet now. See that fallen log over there? We'll walk to that and just observe for a bit. May is a great time for seeing animals. lots of young ones around. They climbed out quietly and followed Beth across the meadow, their footsteps soft on the grass. The meadow was beautiful, filled with wildflowers in purple, yellow, and white, the grass still damp with dew in the shadier spots. At the edge, a fallen log provided a natural bench, and they sat down in a line, looking out across the meadow. For several minutes, nothing happened. Just the sound of wind moving through the trees, birds calling from the forest edge, and the distant rush of water from a stream. Then May nudged Owen and pointed silently. A deer had emerged from the tree line, a doe, her coat reddish-brown, her ears alert. She stepped delicately into the meadow, paused to test the air, then began grazing. Moments later, 2 fawns appeared, their coats still spotted, their legs comically long and thin. "Look," May whispered, barely audible. They watched as the deer family moved across the meadow, the fawns staying close to their mother, occasionally bounding a few steps in that characteristic bouncing gait. The doe raised her head frequently, listening and watching, but she didn't seem alarmed by the group sitting quietly on the log. Anish was filming on his phone, probably already planning how he'd show this to his students. Zara had her camera up, but wasn't clicking, just watching through the viewfinder, perhaps knowing that some moments were better experienced than photographed. The deer grazed for about 10 minutes, gradually working their way across the meadow, and then slipped back into the forest as silently as they'd appeared. "That was incredible," Owen said in a normal voice now. "I've never seen deer that close." "May is baby season," Beth said. "Those fawns were probably born just a few weeks ago. You can see they're still a little wobbly." They sat on the log a while longer and were rewarded with the sight of a coyote trotting along the far edge of the meadow and a hawk circling overhead. The meadow felt timeless, like a place where the same patterns of life had been playing out for thousands of years. Animals grazing, predators hunting, seasons turning. Eventually, Beth stood. "We should keep moving. I want to take you to Olmsted Point before lunch." Back in the Jeep, they continued driving through the park. The landscape changed as they gained elevation. Fewer massive trees, more granite, patches of snow still visible in shaded areas. The road switched back and forth up the mountainside, each turn revealing new views. At Olmsted Point, they parked and walked to another overlook. This one offered a completely different perspective. They were looking across a high granite landscape, with Half Dome visible from its side rather than its face. The stone here was smooth and rounded, carved by glaciers into gentle domes and flowing shapes. "This is glacial polish," Douglas said, running his hand over the rock. "Look how smooth it is." The glacier moved over this, carrying sand and small stones, polishing the granite like sandpaper. You can still see the scratches. See those parallel lines? Those are striations, showing which direction the ice was moving. Lyla crouched down to look more closely. Sure enough, fine parallel scratches ran across the rock surface, all pointing the same direction. It was like reading a story written in stone. Zara was lying on her stomach, photographing tiny wildflowers growing in cracks in the granite. "It's amazing how life finds a way," she said. "There's barely any soil here, but these flowers are thriving." "Nature's pretty determined," Anish agreed. "I tell my students, life will colonize anything. Glaciers, deserts, volcanic rock, the deepest ocean. It finds a way." They explored the area around Olmsted Point, climbing on the smooth granite, finding small pools of snowmelt water, examining the twisted shapes of trees that managed to grow in this harsh environment. The air was thinner here, and Lyla could feel her breathing working a bit harder. When everyone had finished exploring, Beth produced a cooler from the Jeep's back. Lunchtime. I've got sandwiches, turkey, veggie, and ham, plus fruit, chips, and cookies. Help yourselves. They sat on the granite, eating lunch with one of the most spectacular views Lyla had ever seen. The sandwiches were simple but good, and the apple she chose was crisp and sweet. May and Owen shared a bag of chips, tossing them to each other playfully. Douglas had brought his own lunch, a precisely organized container with separate compartments for each item, and ate methodically while studying the landscape. So Anish, Zara said, "What's the hardest part about teaching middle schoolers about nature when you're in a city?" "Connection," Anish said honestly. "I mean, they feel removed from it, you know? Everything moves fast. Everything is designed to grab their attention. And then I'm trying to show them a picture of lichen and explain how it takes 20 years to grow an inch, and they're like, cool, but they don't really get it. But you know what works? Field trips. Even just to a city park. When they can touch a tree, smell the earth, see a real bird up close, then it clicks." "That's why places like this matter so much," Douglas said. "Not just as recreation, but as education. As reminders of what the world is outside our human constructions." They finished lunch and packed up carefully, making sure to leave no trace. Beth checked that everyone had water and sunscreen, then got them back in the Jeep. Next up, Tenaya Lake. It'll still be pretty cold, but it's beautiful, and there's an easy walk along the shore. The drive to Tenaya Lake took them through high country, areas where snow still lingered in large patches, where the trees were shorter and tougher, adapted to harsh winters. The lake appeared suddenly as they crested a rise, its surface a brilliant blue, surrounded by granite peaks and forest. They parked and walked down to the shore. The water was incredibly clear, and Lyla could see smooth stones on the bottom, even in the deeper areas. The lake was fed by snowmelt, and when she dipped her fingers in, the water was shockingly cold. "Some people swim here in summer," Beth said, "but in May you'd have to be pretty tough, or crazy, maybe both." They walked along a path that followed the shoreline, the lake on one side and forest on the other. The path was easy and level, perfect for a relaxed stroll after lunch. May and Owen walked ahead, taking selfies with the lake in the background. Douglas had wandered to the water's edge and was examining something in the shallows, probably rocks or aquatic insects. Anish and Zara were comparing notes about photography, Zara showing him some of the shots she'd taken today. Lyla walked at her own pace, sometimes with the group, sometimes a bit apart, enjoying the solitude within company. The lake was peaceful, its surface rippled gently by a light breeze. A few ducks paddled near the far shore, and she could hear their calls echoing across the water. They spent almost an hour at Tenaya Lake, some people sitting on the rocky beach, others continuing to walk the shoreline path. It was the kind of place that invited you to simply be present, to sit and watch the light change on the water, to listen to the small sounds of nature, wind in the trees, water lapping at rocks, birds calling. Eventually, Beth checked her watch. "We should start heading back, but I want to make one more stop, Bridalveil Fall. We saw it from tunnel view, but you haven't really experienced it until you're standing at its base." Back in the Jeep, they began the descent from the high country. The temperature rose noticeably as they lost elevation, and the forest thickened again. Beth pointed out a bear in the distance, just a dark shape moving through the trees, but it was too far away to see clearly. "That's probably a black bear," she said. "There are a few hundred in the park. They're mostly vegetarian, despite the name, bear. Mostly eating plants, berries, insects. They're smart, though. They've learned that humans equal food, so we have to be really careful about food storage." Bridalveil Fall was accessible by a short paved path from the parking area. They could hear it before they could see it, a deep rushing roar that grew louder as they approached. Then they rounded a bend, and there it was. The waterfall plunged 620 feet down the granite cliff, the water white and foaming as it fell. At this time of year, with the snowmelt at its peak, the fall was powerful and full, throwing up spray that created rainbows in the afternoon sun. The mist reached them even from a distance, cooling and refreshing. They walked as close as they could, until the spray was soaking them, until they had to raise their voices to be heard over the roar of the water. It was primal and powerful, a reminder of nature's raw force. May was laughing, her hair plastered to her face from the spray. Owen was trying to take photos, but his phone screen kept getting too wet. Zara had wrapped her camera in a plastic bag but was still shooting, accepting that she was going to get drenched. Douglas stood with his arms crossed, smiling like he'd just witnessed something he'd been waiting his whole life to see. Lyla tilted her face up, letting the spray wash over her. The sound of the falling water seemed to fill everything, drowning out thoughts, leaving just the sensation of cold mist and the sight of water plunging endlessly downward. After several minutes, they retreated to drier ground, everyone slightly soaked but grinning. Beth pulled out a towel and offered it around, and they took turns drying their faces and hands. "That," Anish said, "is going to be impossible to explain to my students. They need to experience that." "Bring them here," Beth said simply. "Seriously, there are school programs. It's worth it." The drive back to Yosemite Village was quieter, everyone pleasantly tired. The afternoon sun slanted through the trees, creating long shadows. They passed meadows where deer grazed, crossed bridges over the rushing Merced River, drove beneath the towering cliffs that no longer seemed quite so impossible now that Lyla had spent the day among them. Beth pulled into the village just as the sun was touching the top of the valley walls. "That's our day," she said. "Thank you all for being such a great group. I hope you'll explore more of the park while you're here." They climbed out of the jeep, stretching legs that had stiffened from sitting. Douglas shook Beth's hand formally. "Young lady, that was one of the best days I've had in quite some time. Thank you." May and Owen were already planning their next hike, looking at a map Beth had given them. Zara was reviewing her photos, a satisfied smile on her face. Anish was making notes on his phone, probably already thinking about lesson plans. The group lingered for a few minutes, exchanging contact information and sharing thoughts about the day. Then, gradually, they dispersed, May and Owen heading to their campsite, Douglas to his lodge, Anish toward the visitor center to check out the exhibits. Lyla walked slowly through the village as the evening settled in. The shops were beginning to close, and the day's visitors were heading to their accommodations or to dinner. She found a small cafe still open and ordered a bowl of soup and some bread. The soup was simple, vegetable with beans, but warming and satisfying after a day outdoors. She ate slowly, watching through the window as people passed by, as the light continued to fade from the sky. After dinner, she walked to a bridge she'd noticed earlier, one that crossed the Merced River. The water below was moving fast, dark and powerful, reflecting the last light from the sky. She stood on the bridge for a while, leaning on the railing, watching the water flow past. A family walked by, parents and 3 young children, all tired from their day. The smallest child was being carried, already asleep on their father's shoulder. They nodded to Lyla as they passed, and she nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of fellow travelers. The valley was settling into twilight now. The cliffs were dark silhouettes against a sky that was shifting from blue to purple. The first stars were appearing, faint at first but growing brighter as she watched. The sound of the river was constant and soothing, a reminder that it had been flowing here long before humans arrived and would continue long after. Lyla thought about the day, the deer in the meadow, the glacial polish at Olmsted Point, the power of Bridalveil Fall. She thought about Douglas's comment about standing at the roots of ancient mountains, and how everything here existed on a timescale so much larger than human life. There was something humbling but also comforting about that. Her concerns, her plans, her daily worries, all of them seemed smaller in the face of this landscape that measured time in millions of years, that had been shaped by forces so powerful they could carve granite like clay. She left the bridge and walked toward her lodge. The path wound through tall trees that were now just dark shapes against the sky. Somewhere in the distance, she heard what might have been a coyote calling, the sound wild and lonely but somehow fitting. Back at her lodge, she sat on the small porch outside her room. The night air was cool but not cold, and the sounds of the forest surrounded her. The whisper of wind in the trees, the occasional crack of a branch, the constant background rush of the river. She thought about tomorrow. Maybe she'd join another tour, or maybe she'd explore on her own. There were trails she wanted to walk, more waterfalls to see, more meadows to discover. But that was tomorrow. For now, she was content to sit here in the darkness, feeling the peace of the mountains settle around her like a blanket. Above, the stars continued to multiply as the sky darkened fully. The Milky Way became visible, a river of light arcing across the heavens. Lyla leaned back, looking up, and felt wonderfully small and wonderfully connected all at once, a tiny part of something vast and ancient and beautiful. The forest breathed around her, the river sang its endless song, and the mountains stood silent and eternal. Lyla sat peacefully in her chair, wrapped in the cool night air, feeling profoundly grateful for this day, this place, this moment of perfect calm under the twinkling lights.